Gonzaga has added a ton of talent in the transfer portal this offseason, but we cannot forget about the return of Steele Venters, who could be a huge X factor for Mark Few and the Zags.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, folks, it is Wednesday. It is WCC Wednesday. We'll get into that at the end of the show, but today is our season in review episode for Steele Venters, and if you're thinking there is not a season to review for Steele Venters, we are going to talk about his history prior to his time at Gonzaga. We're going to talk about the injury he suffered last year, give some updates on his recovery from said injury, including a timeline to when he expects to be back playing 5-on-5 basketball and eventually back to full strength. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about his role next season, what that might look like for the Zags, especially with so many additions coming in at the 3-2-3 positions, like in Achente and like, of course, Michael Ajayi and Caleb Battle. We'll talk about that, what it means for Steele, what his role might look like, his future in Spokane, his future at Gonzaga, his potential NBA future as well. All that coming up today. We're also going to close out the show with an update on a transfer out of the WCC where he ended up landing, as well as some updates on Washington State as they come into the conference for the first time. So we got some Eastern Washington love with Steele Venters, Gonzaga love, of course, as always, and we're closing out talking about Washington State, good old Inland Northwest Empire here conversation. So let's start with Steele Venters, history here. Steele's not quite from Eastern Washington, although close, depends on your definition, I suppose. He's from Ellensburg, Washington, pretty squarely in the middle of the state, 6'7" wing. He was unranked as a prospect coming out of high school, playing at Ellensburg High School over there. He ended up committing to Eastern Washington, joined the Eagles in the 2019-20 season, redshirted for that entire campaign, did not play at all that season, came back as a redshirt freshman in the 2020-21 season, played 17 games for Eastern Washington that year, 9.5 minutes per game. Didn't do a whole lot, 3.6 points, 1.5 boards. He did shoot 41.5% from three, because if there is one thing Steele Venters is really, really good at doing, it is shooting and making three-point shots. He was 12 of 29 in that very small half-season role that he played as a freshman or a redshirt freshman back in 2020-21. And then the next year, he steps into a much bigger role. Shante Leggins is gone. He was his head coach his first 2 years. Leggins takes that job at UP. Venters steps into a bigger role under David Riley in the 2021-22 season. Venters, who again had played less than 10 minutes a game in just 17 games the previous year. The next year, he starts all 33 games that he plays, and he averages 34 minutes per game. He instantly stepped into a huge role. Part of that was players following Shante Leggins to Portland in the transfer portal, a lot of roster kind of chaos that happened, but Venters was a huge beneficiary in that conversation. He steps up, goes from being a bit player to scoring 16.7 points per game, along with 3.9 rebounds, 2.2 assists, and 0.9 steals. He shot a red-hot 43.4% from three in that season on 6 three-point attempts per game. So he was not only an efficient three-point shooter, he was a high-volume efficient three-point shooter. That is a rarity to be able to shoot at that level. Anything over 42% on over 5 three-point attempts per game, that is remarkable. You don't see those numbers all that often. And Venters knocked that out in that redshirt sophomore season for Eastern Washington. He was all Big Sky first team member, big time contributor, one of the best players in the conference. And he followed that up with another great season in 2022-23. His minutes dipped a bit. He went from playing about 33.7 minutes in that redshirt sophomore year to playing just 31.5 minutes in that redshirt junior year. Still started all 34 games that Eastern Washington played. Numbers it was basically the same, dipped a tiny bit, 15.3 points per game, 2.8 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 0.8 steals. The efficiency dropped a bit. He was still 37.1% from three, and that was on 6.2 attempts per game. So a slightly increase in the volume, slight decrease in the percentage, but still 37% being pretty significantly the worst three-point percentage of Steele Venters' career, is less of a knock on 37% and more of an acknowledgement that he has been a very good three-point shooter throughout his career. In that season, Steele Venters is named the Big Sky Player of the Year over Dalton Knecht, who was starting wing for Northern Colorado. I think he averaged over 20 points per game for Northern Colorado. Dalton Knecht and Steele Venters both hit the transfer portal the same offseason. We'll talk about what happened to Steele. Obviously, we know the situation there. Dalton Knecht transfers to Tennessee, becomes a All-American, and is going to be a lottery pick almost certainly when the draft rolls around in June. A good indication of the talent level that is in the Big Sky. And the fact that Steele Venters was one of, if not the best player in that conference for 2 years, is a very good sign for his ability to impact Gonzaga. And that's what everybody was hoping for, because he hit the transfer portal after that redshirt sophomore season at Eastern Washington and pretty quickly committed to Gonzaga. He's from the area, always wanted to play at Gonzaga, has admitted that it was a dream of his to get to play for the Zags, to play for Mark Few. As soon as Gonzaga said, hey, we'd love to have you, we'll take you, boom, that was that. No mystery, not a lot of, here's my top five, here's my top three, who's the highest bidder? Nope. Steele Venters said, I want to play at Gonzaga. They want me. I'm in. I'm done. I'm there. And he committed to Gonzaga very early in the offseason last year. He also declared for the NBA draft the same way that Michael Ajayi did, who was also a very early commitment to the Gonzaga Bulldogs in the transfer portal, who also declared for the draft. There was a little bit less mystery with Steele Venters. There was a lot of consternation about whether Ajayi would stay in the draft process. With Venters, it seemed less likely that he would. I think he pulled out a little bit earlier than Michael Ajayi did, but return to the Zags, set up for a big role in 2023-24. And it's very clear that the plan was for Steele Venters to start at the small forward position for Gonzaga coming into the year. Most people expected that was the case even before there had been any action, any games. Craziness in the kennel rolls around. Everybody pretty much starts or plays in craziness, so it's a little hard to glean from that. He played 16 minutes, had 3 points and a board. And then in the scrimmage game against Lewis Clark State, Steele did start that game. He played 17 minutes. Again, the starters and reserves all kind of played around the same amount of minutes because it was an exhibition game against a non-Division I opponent. Steele had 2 points and 1 board and 1 assist on 1 of 4 shooting in that scrimmage game against Lewis Clark State. I remember the bucket. It was a backdoor cut to the rim. I think he got a pass from either Nembhard or Hickman and dunked it. I remember thinking that his ability to not only space the floor as a shooter, but his ability to read defenses and make backdoor cuts, move fluently without the basketball. That was going to be a big skill set that we were expecting Steele to bring for Gonzaga last year, the ability to shoot the 3-ball and punish defenses who come out too far on him defensively. But unfortunately, 2 days before Gonzaga's first game of the season, Steele Venters came down awkwardly during practice on his leg, felt a pop, and realized immediately that something was significantly wrong. His fears were confirmed, unfortunately, with the report that he tore his ACL. Again, 2 days before the start of the season, was forced to miss the entire campaign. I was back reading some old articles that the Spokesman Review, and I did not realize this, but apparently Steele Venters' father tore his ACL during his college basketball career at Central Washington. Really not something that you want, not an experience that you as a parent want to pass on to your kids, certainly. So very kind of sad to hear that. Venters did mention that having that empathy from his dad, I think, helped, which I could imagine that it would. Somebody who understands the situation, but really a tough situation, of course, for Steele more than anything. But it was a tough situation for Gonzaga as well. They thrust Dusty Stromer into a starting role, a role that he was not expected to fill by the coaching staff. He was not himself expecting to fill the role. He did, I think, as well as expected. He had his ups, he had his downs. Ultimately, Gonzaga, of course, switched the starting rotation, entered Ben Gregg, brought Dusty off the bench. That really kind of helped kick Gonzaga's season into gear in a significant way. But outside shooting remained an issue for Gonzaga all year long. They found it towards the end of the year. They got some more consistency. Nolan Hickman was a big part of that. Ben Gregg, Braden Huff as well. But ultimately not having that floor spacing wing was an issue for Gonzaga throughout the season. And it was clear that Steele would have been a big, important piece for Gonzaga had he been healthy. So what now? Because Steele Venters is still on the road to recovery. He never entered the transfer portal this offseason. He is back, baby. He is in the mix. He is ready to make his regular season debut for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. But what is that role going to look like? Because the Zags have added 3 players. They add Michael Ajayi. They add Caleb Battle. They add Emmanuel Inocente. They also retain Dusty Stromer. So is there a fit for Steele Venters entering the 2024-25 season? We're going to discuss that in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, Gametime, folks. It is minor league baseball season, one of my favorite times of the year. I'm about 10 minutes away from the Hillsboro Hops. Love getting a chance to check out some Hops baseball. And I have the luxury, because of my closeness, to be able to make last-minute decisions to head to the ballpark. And one of the best things about that is I have Gametime, which is the perfect place to buy those last-minute tickets, because prices on the Gametime app, folks, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned about buying tickets from a third-party source, that they may not be real, that you may get turned away at the gate, one of the nice things about Gametime is their ticket coverage is the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Folks, I can get 2 tickets to the Hillsboro Hops for $23. You got a minor league stadium around you, download Gametime, use code LOCKEDONCollege. You're going to the ballpark for $3. Terms do apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still going through the Steele Venters season in review episode, talking about his history, his career at Eastern Washington, transferring to Gonzaga, the injury that cost him the season. Now taking a look at what this role is going to look like when Steele Venters makes his actual Gonzaga basketball debut this upcoming season. Because right now, the biggest question for Steele, outside of what the actual role is going to look like, which we'll talk about, is the health. Because ultimately, his role is going to be determined by whether he is fully 100% at full strength when the season starts, if he's still, getting his feet under him, as it were, if he's still kind of not quite at that 100% marker or not. And I think I've talked about this on the show. I've seen it talked about a few other times, some wonderings if Gonzaga's kind of desire to add so many players at the position similar to the spot that he plays. Ajayi kind of came in to replace Anton Watson, so that kind of makes sense. Caleb Battle, I guess a replacement for Luka Krajinovic, very different situation, but Battle is going to play a lot in 3-guard lineups, so he kind of steps in as a small forward type player. Emmanuel Inocente is pretty clearly a 2-3 guard wing type player who kind of fits that same position. And I think a lot of people are wondering if maybe there's concern about Steele Venters being fully healthy for the start of the year. All I can tell you is the most recent update, which comes from April, when there was a conversation by Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review talking to Gonzaga's head basketball athletic trainer, Josh Theorin, who said, Theorin said that Steele is going to be good for 5-on-5 at the end of the summer, was the direct quote. There was more conversations. They said he's ramping up his activity. I think he's going to start moving side to side. Again, this was back in April. He's been on the treadmill. Now he's going to start moving side to side, lateral mobility, etc., things like that. The plan that they're on would have Steele playing 5-on-5 basketball towards the end of the summer. And if everything continues to go to plan, again, as of April, the expectation is that he would be back for the start of the season. Again, back at the start of the season versus feeling no effects at whatsoever in terms of not only recovery with the knee, but also just general fatigue, being in game shape, being kind of just comfortable playing full 5-on-5, 100% full speed basketball. They're kind of different things. So it's still unclear at this point. Obviously, it's early June. There's still a long time between early November when the season starts. We're not sure where Steele Venters is going to be. Nothing has indicated that he is not on track to be back. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that there's reason to believe that he's not going to be ready. Everything that we have seen indicates that he is. We just we won't know until he's actually finished the road to recovery, which he is currently in the middle of right now. If we assume Steele Venters is healthy and ready to go, it's still a little unclear what his role is going to be. I think of all the players on Gonzaga's roster, if you had to ask me who is the murkiest in terms of what I expect their role to be next season, I believe the answer would be Steele Venters, because we know Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman are going to start at the 1 and the 2. We know Graham Ike is going to start at the 5. I expect Mike Ajayi and Ben Gregg to be the other starters. It's possible Khalif Battle starts, Mike Ajayi starts at the 4, Ben Gregg comes off the bench. It's possible. Either way, the roles for Khalif Battle, the role for Michael Ajayi, the role for Ben Gregg is pretty well set. Who starts, who doesn't start, it doesn't really matter. The roles for those guys, as well as the other 3 that we mentioned, are all pretty well established. Braden Huff's role is established. Backup center. Every minute Graham Ike is not on the floor, Braden Huff's on the floor. They may play some minutes together. We'll see how that shakes out, but Braden Huff's role is pretty solid. Then you get into the 8, 9 guys. 8, 9, 10, 11 guys, frankly. You get into the Dusty Stromers, the Steele Venters, the Jun Suk-yeos, the Emmanuel Innocentes. What are those roles going to look like for those guys? And it's hard to know because Steele offers something that a lot of other players in this team don't have. Consistent floor spacing, outside shooting from the wing. Steele Venters is a solid 6'7". He's a great mover without the basketball, and he is a pure knockdown three-point shooter. We haven't seen a ton else of Steele's game. He has not displayed a ton of facilitation, ball handling, passing skills. I think only one of his 3 years did he have more assists than turnovers on the season. He's not a great rebounder. He's not a great defensive player. He's not as bad as he's been made out to be by some places, but he's not great on that end of the floor. What Steele Venters is really good at is shooting the basketball and moving without the basketball offensively, particularly when teams overcommit to defending him on the perimeter. Those are skills that are valuable on this team. Dusty Stromer, inconsistent as a three-point shooter. He'll be better next year, but will he be 45%, which Steele Venters could pretty easily hit? Probably not. Probably not. Michael Ajayi, good three-point shooter last year, low volume. What does that look like in this role, especially if he's playing a lot of minutes at the 4? Khalif Battle, good three-point shooter, not at the percentage that Steele is. Battle he's a different player. He's not a standstill catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. Khalif Battle is a put the ball on the deck, get to the hole, get fouled, get to the free throw line, score that way. That's what Khalif Battle is good at. You know what helps a player like that succeed? Having shooters on the wing. That's what helps. If defenses have to worry about where Steele Venters is, they're less likely to pack the paint, gives Khalif Battle more opportunities to drive and score that way. Same with Ryan Nembhard. Steele Venters can fill a valuable role on this team because of the skill set that he possesses, that he has at a different level than the other players on this roster. Having said all of that, Graham Ike, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Michael Ajayi, Ben Gregg, Khalif Battle, Braden Huff, those guys are all going to play a lot of minutes. Those guys are all going to play a lot of minutes. They can mix and match a ton of different ways with those guys. Dusty Stromer, hard to imagine he doesn't play a lot either. He's a valuable player. He's a good defensive player on the wing. Freshmen take big leaps between their freshman and sophomore year. He showed improvement as a three-point shooter. It is really hard to imagine that his minutes go down or don't increase next season. If he's playing at that amount of minutes, 15, 18, 20 minutes, even if he's playing 12, 15 minutes plus everybody else, there are not a lot of minutes left. That's why I'm having a hard time figuring out where Steele Venters is going to fit in the mix, because you can't not play him. You need his skill set. You need his three-point shooting. He makes Khalif Battle better. He makes Ryan Nembhard better. He helps this team with what he can do at a level that is better than the level that Michael Ajayi brings it, better than the level Khalif Battle brings it, better than the level Dusty Stromer brings it. But where does he fit in the mix otherwise? My guess right now would be something in the lines of 8 to 10 minutes per game, somewhere in that range. It doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm having a hard time seeing it being a much bigger role than that. Obviously, injuries play a factor, whether they're Steele's injuries, whether somebody else gets injured. That is a factor. But right now, if everybody's healthy, that's kind of the projection that I have for him right now. And as a reminder, this Steele's only played 2 years that count. The 2021-22 season and the 2022-23 season, those 2 seasons where he put up 15-plus points per game, where he was an all-Big Sky contributor, those are the only 2 seasons that count against him eligibility-wise right now, because he redshirted fully in 2019-20. 2020-21, he played 17 games, but that year is the COVID year. So you get an extra year because of that. And then last year, of course, he did not play because he medically redshirted. 2 of the 5 years that Steele Venters has been in college, 2 of them count. But here's the thing. While he may have this year and next year to play college basketball, is he going to? It's similar to Graham Ike. Do these guys want to be back in college for a 6th year, in his 7th year for Steele Venters? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't talked to them. I don't know the specifics there, but it's fair to wonder if this upcoming season will be Steele Venters' final season in a college basketball uniform, even though he has the ability to stay for 2 years. He could also return. Look at the fact that basically all the guys in front of him are going to be gone. Caleb Battle will be gone. Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman will be gone. Ben Gregg and Michael Ajayi will be gone. Steele could return into a guard mix that would include Dusty Stromer, that would, of course, include Braden Smith, that would include Emmanuel Inocente. He could return into that mix, play a valuable role for Gonzaga in that 25-26 season. I'm not betting on it. I suspect if you had told me I have to predict whether Steele plays 1 or 2 more years at Gonzaga, I would guess 1. But it kind of depends how the season goes. It depends what his role shakes out like. It depends on his health, all of that stuff. But it's worth acknowledging that he does have 2 years if he chooses to use it. And then again, the NBA factor. We talked about Dalton Knecht, who Steele beat as Big Sky Player of the Year, turning into a legitimate NBA talent, a lock to be a lottery pick in a couple of weeks based on a dominant season for the Tennessee Volunteers. Dillon Jones plays for Weber State. He's going to be an NBA player as well. He's going to get drafted this year. Maybe second round, maybe sneak to the late first. But there are players going from the Big Sky to the NBA. Steele is one of the best players in that conference with guys who are in the NBA. We're going to be in the NBA, I should say. Regardless, Steele has the talent. He was in a conference that has that talent. I'm not sure I see an NBA future for him based on what we've seen so far, but if he comes out next year, he moves really well laterally. He looks improved defensively. The facilitation skills are there. He's making good reads. He's making better passes. He's shooting 45, 46, 48% from three. Heck yeah, that could all happen for him. But right now I see a player who's a very good three-point shooter, who's an average athlete, who hasn't showed facilitation skills or any other really tangible NBA caliber skills outside of the shooting. That makes it a little tougher to project him as an NBA player, especially with a significant injury under his belt. But you never know. This could be a big year for Steele Venters. I'm not seeing a ton of playing time for him right now, but that could change. He could play his way into a bigger role, play his way into the NBA. The outcomes are nearly endless for Steele Venters. I'm just happy that he's back, that he's going to get an opportunity to play for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, his dream. He's going to get that chance this year, and he's going to be a big piece. Even if you're only playing 8 to 10 minutes a game, he's going to be a big, important factor for Mark Few and the Bulldogs in this upcoming season. All right, folks, San Francisco lost a starting guard in the transfer portal to the Utah Utes. We're going to talk about that. Washington State is reloading as they transition into the WCC. More on that as well, all coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our Steele Venters season in review, pseudo season preview episode here, and instead talking about some WCC updates. It is WCC Wednesday after all. I want to start talking about Mongolian Mike Sharavjamts, the starting point guard last year for San Francisco Dons. He is initial transfer from Dayton. He entered the transfer portal after the season. He is now going to join the Utah Utes as they transition into the Big 12 Conference. For those of you who don't remember Sharavjamts, he started his career at Dayton, was an A10 freshman, I think all freshman team, top 75, maybe even top 50 recruit coming out of high school, goes to Dayton, 5.5 points, 2.5 assists as a freshman, hits the transfer portal, lands with the Dons. It was a big deal when USF landed him. His top 5 or his top 4 were all high major schools in San Francisco. He commits to the Dons, had a solid season last year as a sophomore, 34 games, started all of them, averaged 7.7 points, about 3 boards, 2.7 assists, shot 36% from 3. He was a 6'8" guard, and he had the ball in his hands a lot. He basically played point guard last year for that team. They had Malik Thomas playing kind of off ball, Marcus Williams playing off ball. They had the guards coming off the bench, Beasley, but they really kind of had the ball in Sharavjamts' hands quite a bit. The problem was that he wasn't particularly aggressive with the basketball in his hands. He's a 6'8" guard who had mismatches constantly. He barely ever went to the free throw line, was really not somebody who put the ball on the deck, tried to finish through contact and get to the stripe. That's just not an area of his game. He was a decent passer, but it always kind of felt like he was just sort of there. He didn't make a lot of mistakes, but he also didn't make a lot of things happen. It reminds me a little bit of Nolan Hickman's sophomore season at Gonzaga when he was kind of thrust into the starting point guard role, and it wasn't a great fit, and the Zags eventually ended up trying to use Hunter Salas more at the point guard spot. They kind of just let Drew Timme be the point guard because they sort of were kind of panicking on what to do. And there's a lot of criticism about Hickman that year, which he has really put in the rearview mirror having some fantastic performance last year. But for Hickman, I thought what I saw from him when he was the point guard was not a lot of mistakes, but also not a lot of things happening. And that's kind of what Sharavjamts was like. Coach Chris Gerlifson spoke to me on the Locked On College Basketball podcast, as well as on the Locked On Zags podcast. And he kind of expressed the same thing, like wanting to see more assertiveness from Sharavjamts, more attacking the basket, doing that kind of stuff. And it never really materialized at Dayton as a freshman or last year for the Dons. Now he goes to Utah. Sixth transfer portal addition for the Utes, joins a couple of great guards in Mason Madsen coming over from Rice, as well as Miro Little coming over from Baylor. Craig Smith, the head coach for the Utes, trying to help build that program. They're a great football team moving into the Big 12. They got a chance to compete right away for a Big 12 title, folks. They're not going to compete for a Big 12 title in the basketball side of things, not with Arizona, not with Houston, not with Baylor, not with Kansas, not with Iowa State, not with BYU, not the list TCU. The list goes on and on and on. Utah's going to be towards the bottom of the conference, quite frankly, but I'm happy for Sharavjamts. I hope this is a landing spot that works well for him. Hopefully he can get unlocked a little bit and find some of that success that I think is absolutely there. He's got a lot of capabilities, just hasn't really shown it yet so far in his career. Finally, I want to close out the show today talking about Washington State, because they are in about a month, they will be an official member of the WCC as a basketball program. They're going to be in the conference for the next 2 years, and Wazoo is going to be an entirely new team. The team that was a 7 seed last year went to the NCAA tournament under Coach Kyle Smith. None of those guys are back. Every scholarship player from last year's Washington State team is gone. They all either entered the transfer portal or declared for the NBA draft and stayed in the draft process. Head coach Kyle Smith is gone as well. He has gone to Stanford in the ACC. Still bizarre to say that Kyle Smith going from Washington State to Stanford instead of being a packed inter-conference move is now a WCC to ACC move. Very strange in the modern world that we're living in, but that's the situation for Wazoo. Everybody's gone, but David Riley takes over the head coach at Eastern Washington. He is now the head coach at Wazoo, and he brought 4 of his players with him, including most recently the addition of Cedric Coward. Coward's a 6'6" wing from Fresno. He actually began his college career at Willamette in Salem, Oregon, a D3 school. Then he spent 2 years at Eastern Washington. Last year for the Eagles, 15.5 points a game, 6.7 boards, a little under 2 assists, about a steal, and he shot 38% from 3. Really good stuff from Cedric Coward last year for Eastern Washington. Not only was he a 38% shooter from 3, he was a 69% shooter on 2-pointers and an 89% shooter on free throws. The efficiency is insane. 50, 40, 90 is kind of the marker that you like to, that is like, wow, that's a really good shooter. 50% on 2s, 40% on 3s, 90% from the line. Coward was 70% from 2, basically 69%. He was just under 40% from 3 at 38, and he was 89.5% from the line. Those are insane levels of efficiency. I'm extremely excited to see what Coward brings into the WCC and to Washington State. He's the 4th Eastern Washington player to follow David Riley, alongside Dane Erikstrup, alongside Lawan Watts, and Ethan Price. 4 of the biggest additions for Wazoo all come from Eastern Washington. We just spent a whole show talking about an Eastern Washington transfer in Steele Venters. Certainly somebody we expect to make a big contribution, so I wouldn't rule out Wazoo being productive next year with 4 guys coming from Eastern Washington. Again, Portland's best year under Shante Leggins was their first year, and they brought a lot of guys from Eastern over that year as well. Wazoo also has some other transfer portal additions, as you would expect from a team that lost their entire scholarship roster. Then the offseason, they add Nate Calmise from University of Washington. ND Okafor comes up from Cal. They add Rahards Vevers from Quinnipiac as well. Really excited to see what Wazoo brings. Not as excited about Oregon State. Not a lot of optimism there, frankly. They lost a lot of talent. They brought some guys in. We'll talk about them another time as well, but I'm excited about Wazoo. I think that this year has a chance to be sneaky good for them. I think a lot of people are writing them off because they lost their entire team from last year. Like, oh, they're usually not good at basketball. They were good last year, but everybody's gone, so are they going to stay good? We'll see. I think David Riley's a good coach. I think this is a team that can absolutely compete in the WCC. St. Mary's is going to be up at the top, as they always are. Of course, Gonzaga is going to be up there. San Francisco's lost a lot of talent. I think they're still going to be quality. And Santa Clara and LMU in particular are both teams that have had really successful off season. So I think there's more depth at the top than we're used to seeing in the WCC. And I think Wazoo is going to be a part of that. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thanks so much. To those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, we'll be back later this week, continuing our season in review series. We're also going to continue to talk about Anton Watson's pursuit of the NBA via the draft. We'll continue to talk about any other updates in the transfer portal, any recruiting updates that we may hear for the Zags if they fill that final scholarship spot. All that coming your way later this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, as always, go Zags.